Welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics.
In recent weeks, the annual Spring Clean Cymru event has been held in Wales, where groups of and lone litter champions have undertaken a mass clean across the nation. This campaign is hot on the heels of this year's Keep Wales Tidy Street Clean Report for 23-24. Social media is, however, awash with stories of poor local environments, with litter, dogfiling, fly tipping and graffiti often being highlighted as problems in many communities. The importance of the local environment cannot be overstated. Our immediate surroundings shape our daily lives, impacting everything from our physical health to our overall well-being. Clean, well-maintained environments not only enhance aesthetics, but also contribute significantly to community cohesion and pride. Joining me to look at all things local environment are Keep Wales Tidy Policy and Research Manager, Gemma Beer. Good evening, Gem.
Good evening.
And co-founder of Cardiff Rivers Group, stalwart of many other charitable endeavours, and all-round volunteer champion, Dave King. Evening, Dave.
Good evening.
Thanks both for joining us. Before we get into the questions I've got properly for this, can you tell us a little bit about the organisations you're here representing and your experience around the local environment? Gemma, Keep Wales Tidy, can you put a bit more detail into what they do and who they are?
Sure. Keep Wales Tidy is an independent environmental charity with a vision for a beautiful Wales, cared for and enjoyed by all. Many people will probably know us through the work that we do with thousands of volunteer groups across Wales on litter picking and cleanup campaigns. And that's a springboard we use for wider community work we do around environmental improvement, such as local places for nature. We also host the international award programmes through the Eco Schools and the Blue Flag Awards for beaches, and we host the Green Flag Award for parks as well. In my team, we run litter surveys across Wales, and I'm a behaviour change practitioner. So I work with local authorities, Welsh Government, other organisations to develop guidance and advice that will actively promote positive environmental behaviours.
Thanks, Jim. Dave, I know, wear many hats, but can you tell us a little bit about your local environment background and perhaps the work of Cardiff Rivers Group?
Cardiff Rivers Group are a charity based in Cardiff, run entirely by volunteers. We started back in 2009 when 6 Keep Wales Tidy volunteers decided that we wanted to do more effort around cleaning the rivers of Cardiff, the Taff, the Ely and the Rumney. So we formed a community group to do that, and we've steadily grown and grown and grown to the point where we now have a distribution list of close on 800 people. And our last event, we had 60 volunteers coming out to help us.
So I imagine for you, Dave, Spring Clean Cymru sees the groups you work with doing quite a bit. This year's event ended on the 31st of March, but how was this year's campaign for you and the groups you volunteer with?
It's good. I think it does give us something to hang the event on so we can actually badge it as Spring Clean, and that's what we want to do. And what we try to do is involve local communities and other groups in doing something quite large, and that's what we managed to do over Easter weekend, where we actually did Hamadryad Park in Cardiff with the residents of Clarence Embankment, Keep Grangetown Tidy as well. So that was with the blessing of the Harbour Authority. So we were able to actually get into the water and actually take out around 155 bags of rubbish. So, yeah, it was a good event, successful.
That's an amazing amount of rubbish from that part of Cardiff. And I've been out with you and know how much you can get from the riverbanks. So it is hugely impressive what you do. Gemma, it's not just in Cardiff. There are groups across Wales, aren't there? How has this year's campaign gone down across the country?
Tens of thousands of volunteers. I think we saw quite a big spike after the COVID pandemic, where people were going out. We've seen a massive increase of volunteers who are really getting involved in their improving their local environments. And litter picking is a really good gateway activity, if you like. It's really easy, it's accessible to anybody. You can just go out and do it. You don't really need any specialist equipment. So it's been great. I'm not sure the numbers are in yet, but we will have those shortly.
These annual campaigns and what local authorities do make a massive difference. Like Dave just mentioned, that one pick in one park in Cardiff of the 150 bags, and you see on social media an awful lot of that. But what is the state of our local environment at the moment, according to the recent Keep Wales Tidy State of the Nation research? What are the key figures we need to be aware of?
So one of the things to say is that the volunteers make an absolutely huge difference, and there's massive groups like Dave's, and they do a really important role in terms of cleansing rivers, like places which wouldn't normally kind of get cleaned in terms of normal cleansing regimes. And we also have a network of individual litter champions who also do a huge amount of work just on their own, daily, weekly, whilst walking their dog. So the local authorities, I think, are probably quite reliant on this kind of massive, unsung, sometimes invisible workforce. So Keep Wales Tidy undertake street litter surveys every year. So we survey 6% of every streets in every local authority every year. We grade those against a cleanliness index, and we also use it as an opportunity to collect litter data as well against various different types of categories. Whilst there are limitations because it doesn't extend to parks and beaches and some of those kind of wider open spaces, what it's really good at telling us is the trends of what's happening with litter overall. So what we can tell you is that litter overall over the past decade, or our baseline survey was actually in 2007-8, so nearly 2 decades now. Litter has been decreasing overall, but we have seen an increase in the change in the types of litter that we find. And one of the key things that we know is that food and drink on the go, so that's your drinks packaging and foods packaging that you get from meal deals or cans and plastic bottles, are increasing. And there's a number of different reasons for that, but the simplest way to explain it is just that as our consumption goes up, what we see in terms of our consumption trends, we also see that as a trend in terms of litter. What the surveys are also really good at is tracking emerging trends and new things as they come about. And a really good example of this is single-use vapes and vape litter. So whilst we see smoking litter, as it's cigarettes, traditional cigarettes, are still very, very widespread, 2 years ago, we picked up on this issue of single-use vapes. And that's a completely new litter source. So they're on around about 10% of our streets. So that's a 10% accumulation of new items across our streets on any one time, which is occurring. It's completely new and very difficult to deal with litter type. There's a correlation between litter and population, as you might expect. So in Cardiff, for example, 33% of the streets we surveyed had single-use vapes litter on them, which is a huge increase from what was previously not even a litter source that was identified. Through our spatial analysis, we also know that there is a correlation between littered areas and more deprived areas. And it's important to say that it's a correlation, it's not causation. We're not saying that poorer people litter more. In fact, I've seen a couple of studies to suggest that the opposite might be true. But what that is telling us is that it's a reflection on how local authorities are dealing with the problem. Local authorities are becoming more reactive in their cleansing schedules due to budget restrictions, and the people that tend to complain about litter, and therefore where the resource is allocated to deal with the problem, tends to be in the more affluent areas, and they don't get directed towards the areas which might be worse off and having a kind of worse impact. So they're the general trends that we see across the board.
That's really interesting, Jem, and I think you and Dave both know that I'm heavily involved in this area, and I think some of those trends reflect what I found in my area of Cardiff. Certainly some slight improvement, but a change in the litter composition. But Dave, you really do do this volunteering week in, week out, the figures do show some improvement. But what do you find on the ground? Are we making strides in this area, or is it really hard going?
I would say it's mixed. A couple of points just from what Gemma was saying about sort of local authorities relying on volunteers. I think that is absolutely true. But the important point, I think, is that volunteers are not there to replace local authority employees or efforts. We should be there to actually supplement what they do. And that's what we try our hardest to do by actually then targeting areas that as Gemma said, that they wouldn't necessarily be able to get to at all because of resources and whatever. But we should be working alongside local authority employees, not actually looking to replace them. And I am concerned that some senior managers or councillors or whatever may see increase in volunteering as a way of justifying reducing headcount. And I think that needs to be raised and nipped in the bud straight away, because that's just not on. In terms of the type of litter that we're seeing, I have to be honest, I haven't seen a reduction in litter at all. Certainly around the streets of where I am, it's a constant battle with it. It has changed. I agree with the vapes. Terrible. I mean, our volunteers are picking thousands up a month. We ask them to actually keep hold of them and bring them to our events so that we can endeavour to actually keep them out of the general waste stream and then take them for recycling at the household waste recycling centres. So we're taking around 2 Bag for Life bags full of vapes a month, I would say, off the streets. And of course, the other thing that we just keep finding are nitrous oxide canisters, which are a very new problem. It used to be the little silver bullets, which are very rare now. It's actually now moved on to the big canisters, and we're knocking on around 10,000 of those that we've taken off the streets of Cardiff in the last year. Plastic bottles, cans could easily be addressed. Deposit return scheme, I think, would just obliterate the litter from there. It incentivise people to either take them for a refund themselves, or you get a new little industry going where people will start collecting them and cashing them in like we used to with the Corona bottles for the deposit. So, yeah, I think it's an ongoing battle. It is changing a bit, but I'm not seeing that many positive signs, to be honest.
You mentioned there, Dave, quite a few things that resonate with me. But you did mention about the authorities there and the support or what they might be doing. They are generally responsible for waste as well. And in my part of Cardiff, the waste regime is often one of the kind of big links with litter, because if you get gulls involved, it can destroy a whole street's kind of look. Do you think local authorities are really putting the resource into local environment in a way that they need to, or is it something we need to really look at again in Wales on how we address this problem?
Yeah, I don't think there's enough resource put into litter, into waste generally. I think part of the problem is it's not sexy. So there's not the push and the emphasis from the councillors or the cabinet. So they are more interested in new build, in so-called regeneration of new railways, as opposed to actually getting the basics right, in my view. And that's where the effort should be put in and the resources to actually get the city in the state that it should be. If you did that, I think then you would get an increase in tourism. The investment would come into the city organically because it's looking good. It's not looking a complete and utter mess. And actually engage with the community, engage with the volunteers, look to do joint events, look to work together and actually address it collectively. There's enough people out there that actually want to make a difference and do things. I don't think there's enough recognition of that, and not enough engagement by any means in really making use of that goodwill and that resource. Because if you get people who are motivated for just a few hours, they can make a huge difference, and people need to tap into that properly appreciate what they've got, tell people that they're doing a good job, say thank you, and let's do more of it, really.
Yeah, I think the economic impact and tourism impact is something I'm interested in. And when I worked in this area, there was very limited research on that kind of link. But Gemma, the tourism aspect Dave mentioned, even this week, we're seeing specific problems. I'm not sure if you saw the stories around the mess at left at influencer hotspots. I think it was Garwen Slate Mine in North Wales, Mid Wales. It was in the news about the mess that influencers were leaving it in and the volunteer efforts to clean it up. And I've seen that for several sites across Wales in recent years. Is that a kind of growing problem, these kind of special places people go and the waste that then is brought and left behind?
I think it is, absolutely. And we saw it, again, we saw that spike in the COVID-19 lockdown. So when domestic tourism was allowed again, there was a massive spike, and you saw these places just strewn with litter and waste. Tourism and litter. So I noted that there's a correlation between litter and population, as you might expect, and that extends to tourist populations as well, which means that the problems that an authority like Gwynedd or Powys has is different to say Newport or some of the Valley's authorities, because of that kind of changing visitor population that you get at different times of year. So from a behavioural perspective, which is how we like to kind of look at everything, is there's a very specific psychology called holiday psychology, which basically means that you are probably a worse person when you're on holiday in terms of your values and the way you behave. So Kerry, you might be the best recycler in the world at home, and you go away for 2 weeks to your caravan in Gwynedd or whatever, and you give yourself a moral license and you say, do you know what, I've been so good for the rest of the year, I don't need to be as perfect for these 2 weeks. So it's very, very difficult to engage tourists in the same way that you engage resident populations. And what you also don't have with a lot of tourists and a lot of visitors is that emotional, tangible, but sometimes indescribable connection with the place that you're visiting. And when I hear Dave speak, you can hear that connection with the place that he's looking after. You can hear that ownership and that care about the place that he lives. And you don't necessarily have that with visitors. So if I was writing tourism policy, it would all be about getting that repeat visitors so you can build up that emotional connection. Because I think when you look at litter is a problem in itself. But I think it's also, I always view it as something which is symptomatic of some of the bigger problems in our society. Its signals are increasing use of single-use plastics. It signals excess consumption, and it signals this kind of disconnect that we have with the natural environment. And I think that for quite a lot of years, what we've been doing is looking to local authorities, and I completely agree with what Dave said earlier, but we're looking at local authorities and relying on them to do all of the reactive stuff in terms of the cleansing and the enforcement, and not focusing so much on the upstream battle, as you like, in terms of prevention, and actually taking this to the producers, implementing that polluter pays principle and taking the fight to where it actually should be. This shouldn't be on the taxpayer or on local authorities to tackle, without also looking at what industry and producers are doing in terms of putting that excess and complex materials on the market that can't be dealt with downstream. However, I would also like to agree that there is a significant argument for investing in local environment quality, and that link between investing in local environment quality and the economic development. So you need to have that whole suite of materials. And at the moment, I think we've only been focusing on what local authorities do and what councillors do. And particularly on a local level, it's a very political issue. People want to be seen to be taking the hard line. People want to be seen to be doing things about it. So whilst I sometimes despair about the disconnect between the waste policies and the local environment quality policies and the littering policies, I also think that it's always going to be a high on the agenda because it's politically popular to be able to deal with it.
Yeah, I think if you speak to local politicians in particular, their biggest grievances they get post bags are all around local environment quality. But I'm going to come back to some of your points you raised there, but I want to kind of close this section around volunteering by just asking Dave. I mentioned earlier that I think litter has improved in my area of Cardiff, but one of the things that I find hard to tell is whether it's improved because the volunteers are improving it. What do you think the state of the nation would be, Dave, if volunteers weren't out regularly and Keep Wales Tidy weren't doing the campaigns?
I think it would be a disaster, to be perfectly honest. And I can give you a small sort of example of that happening, where we were as a group, Cardiff Rivers Group, we were unable to actually clean the riverbanks of the Taff down in the bay for the last 2.5, 3 years, which has been resolved now. But all you had to do was actually just look at the state of the banks, and a lot of them are still the same, where we haven't been able to get to them yet, where just a huge, massive build-up of rubbish. And that, I think, would be replicated across the whole of Wales if it wasn't for volunteers going out and doing their bit. Yeah, a complete and utter mess. And I think this is part of. It's quite difficult with surveys and such like, because they're absolutely essential to do, but you do have an awful lot of individuals now that will go out regularly and do their streets. So if the survey's done just before or just after a litter pick by an individual, then you get a massively different result as well. So I know where you are, Kerry, there's loads of individuals actually doing litter picking. So it could well be that the problem is exactly the same, but we've just got more people trying to address it.
Yeah, I do think that's some of the kind of issues I face, but it all helps, I suppose. The data's useful, but what people want is that cleaner environment. I don't want to put you on the spot, Dave, but that kind of, it did sound like there was a kind of disconnect there with what your group was doing in Cardiff Bay, again, one of our chief tourism economic areas, and that you weren't able to pick for a number of years. Are you able to tell us what that disconnect was?
I think it was a fundamental misunderstanding of how we operate, because the issues are now resolved and we're basically operating exactly the same as we were before. So from our perspective, nothing has changed at all. And I think this is possibly one of the things, is that because you're a volunteer doesn't make you an amateur. Volunteers in the main are trained, they are briefed. You look at some of the Mountain Rescue Service, they are volunteers, and you would never actually call them sort of an amateur force. They're professionals, but they're just not paid. And I think that needs to be recognised more. We do water safety training, we do needle training, all sort of power tool qualifications, all sorts of stuff, as do so many other groups and organisations. And I think that skill and that experience needs to be recognised and harnessed. I'd like to see some of the senior people in these organisations coming out with volunteers and seeing how they really operate, because I think, and it's a very personal view here, I think too many people sit behind a desk dreaming up policies that they really don't know what they're talking about. You might want to edit that out, but there we are.
I think we'll keep that in, and we'll even recommend that anyone listening, and we think we do have quite a good audience of those kind of behind the desk folks, But that's an open invitation to you and any one of your groups. But I think the point I was trying to make was that, for 3 years, that part of Cardiff hadn't been addressed. And if it's not you doing it, it just doesn't get done. And I think that's something which needs to be recognised. Jem, we've talked now a little bit about some of the practical aspects that are being undertaken with the volunteering. But, what else can we do to address this problem with our litter in our local environment? You mentioned DRS.
We're working hard at the moment to try and get local authorities, in particular local authorities, other organisations too, to kind of develop local prevention strategies. And that word prevention is really, really important. We know, and I kind of hear what Dave is saying from his group, it can be really demoralising for a group to go out and continue to deal with the same issues in the same places every week. And so we're really trying to work hard with local authorities and explain to them about the sort of prevention measures that they can put in place and teach them about the kind of the behavioural side of things. So we talk about behavioural science as if it's some sort of magic wand, and it's not. And I'm sure you know this, Kerry, from your previous work in this area. But behavioural science is a relatively young discipline, so there's quite a lot that we don't actually know, particularly around the environmental drivers. What drives people to litter? What drives people to not litter? What are those kind of key things that you need to kind of get in place? And trying to kind of equip local authorities with a bit more of a consistent and kind of people-focused approach, I guess, to what they're dealing with. And that includes getting that relationship with volunteers and valuing those volunteers and kind of working with them collaboratively and not in any sort of way taking away from replacing them as local authority staff. And I do threaten them. I say, if all the volunteers in your area downed their litter pickers tomorrow, what would happen? And they do have a bit of a panicked look on their face. So I think it would be fair to say that local authorities do recognise that kind of value. So the first thing that we'd like to see is locally, local authorities kind of getting on board with that kind of behavioural and preventative approach. So we're working with them on actual strategies that fit the context of those areas. And we can work with them then on indicators that might come through the community group. So speaking to those community groups and for those groups to kind of say, this is the problem and this is where it is, because that local knowledge is absolutely fundamental to how you tackle the problem. There are three major things that we've been working on with Welsh Government and indeed UK Government more broadly to address the issue. The first is, all of these are much delayed, but the first is a much delayed litter and fly tipping prevention plan for Wales. Now, this is quite strange, actually, because if you look at the ambition around environment policy with Welsh Government, they've been really ambitious and proactive with quite a lot of areas of environmental policy, but we don't have a litter and fly tipping prevention plan. Whilst Scotland and even England are on their second reiteration of their plans now. So I think, firstly, that's a really important thing to get in place, because that sets out this is what we are measuring against. This is our focus. It's on prevention. It's not on cleansing. It's not all on volunteers. It's not all on local authorities. It's not just about this. It's about everybody coming together, and this is the approach that we're going to take. And that will help local authorities as well to deliver their local plans. There's two bigger things which are tied into UK government policies. Firstly is Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme, which is quite simply, it's a mechanism which says that producers should pay for the harmful materials that they put onto the market. In the original proposals from the UK government, the proposal was to extend those payments from producers to include where those items were littered, so-called litter payments. England has rolled back on that, but Wales and Scotland remained committed to this principle of extended producer responsibility payments with the litter payments, which is really, really positive, because the majority of litter, as I mentioned, is made up of this food and drink packaging. Linked to that is a deposit return scheme, which was first committed to by Michael Gove, I think, in 2018, so some years ago. We've seen 2 delays and potentially more on the way. It's very frustrating how long this policy has taken when it's proven to do so much.
Well, I just want to bring Dave in on that deposit return scheme. I'm interested in, and if UK government are dragging their heels, let's go alone in Wales like we did with the carrier bag charge. But Dave, Gemma's just listed some of the activities and legislation that we could be looking at or in place regarding the local environment. There are other schemes like printing customer details on fast food containers. What do you think might need to be brought forward to start addressing the issues?
I do totally agree with the approach that Keep Wales Tidy are taking in terms of trying to actually address the litter at source. So I think either trying to reduce packaging. I'd ban polystyrene tomorrow if it was up to me. One of the biggest polluters in the rivers and certainly the bay that we see is polystyrene. I think doing our utmost to reduce it to start with, and then what is produced to make it has to be recyclable, and schemes to be in place to actually then recycle it before you are able to start producing it. So I look at crisp packets and that sort of general. So much of that is what we find in terms as litter. It all needs to be somehow recyclable from the very start. But I'm fully supportive of a deposit return scheme for plastic bottles and for drinks cans. I just think if they could just get that over the line, it would make just such a difference.
I use DRS instead of the full words deposit return scheme. So Gem, what is that in reality? What will that deliver in Wales if it eventually comes in?
We're very hopeful that it will come in. 2026, sorry, is the projected launch date, although we've got a general election in between now and then. So we're very hopeful that they'll stick to that and it won't get delayed again. So very simply, a deposit return scheme is a mechanism where you pay a deposit of 10p, 20p on a drinks container, so say a bottle of Coke or something, and that deposit is then returned when you take it back to the return point or the reverse vending machine. So one of the beauties of it is that it's a producer responsibility scheme. So this isn't a massive scheme that's going to cost Welsh Government or UK Government millions and millions of pounds. Producers pay for this scheme as part of their responsibility. So it transfers the current costs of what taxpayers and local authorities are paying for that proportion of what ends up as litter to producers. There are tens of schemes, I think around 70 odd schemes around the world now where they have deposit return scheme. The latest one was launched in Ireland in February, and they've seen massive successes even in the first month. What we see consistently from these schemes across the world is there's two main outcomes. Firstly is that it reduces litter overall, not just of drinks containers, bottles and cans and things, but it actually decreases litter overall because it communicates to people that waste has a value. And that is really, really important. Overnight through one of those schemes, what you have is that mass behavioural change of industry and of consumers, and that is nothing else we know does that. And this is they're proven. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's just get on with this. The second thing that it does, which is also really important for wider circular economy ambitions and trying to keep the value in waste for as in circulation for as long as possible and extending the life of products, is that it significantly increases the quality of the recyclate. It reduces the contamination that you get for curbside or through other schemes, for example, and it means that those materials can be kept in circulation as new bottles or whatever it is for longer than other schemes. So It's a proven scheme with massive positive benefits. It has been frustrating that it's taken this long, but we're really hopeful. The Welsh Government is really positive about it, and they want an all-in scheme that also includes glass, which I think is really important, although it's been quite contentious in the media of late, unnecessarily, I think. So we're hopeful.
No, it's good. I think all the evidence points to it, and it was certainly something I was looking at back in 2011-12, when just after we'd finished the carrier bag charge. So all power to those working on that. Dave, we're talking about legislation and schemes and things like that, and they are important, the producer responsibility. But, there is a more nuclear option for a lot of what we're talking about: greater enforcement and, to use the punishment, but fines for people who aren't abiding by what we want or expect in society. Do you think that has a place in what we're looking at in Wales?
I think it does in certain instances. I think if you have someone that is constantly fly tipping, constantly just blatantly sort of ignoring the rules on what they can actually put into the recycling, all their food waste goes in with their cardboard and tins and whatever, and they're just not listening to the education and what people are saying, then at that point, I think you've got to use the stick because all else has failed. But I do think it should be a last resort. I think it's got to be made, recycling and waste generally, it's got to be made as easy as possible for people. I think also is a recognition of there are different households and different needs as well. And this is more around sort of waste than litter, to be honest. But where you have houses of multiple occupancy, they are going to generate more waste than a single one-bedroom flat, and therefore they do need some measure of a different treatment, a different approach to waste and such like. Extending waste collections of general waste to 3 weeks won't reduce the amount of waste. It just will increase the amount that's going to be thrown somewhere or put by bins, which will again will increase litter. So it's a whole approach really. But I favour as much education as possible, starting off with the kids at schools, try and get them involved so they can take the messages back to the parents and the household, and then last resort is some enforcement.
Jem, did you want to mention anything on enforcement in any way?
I did, I completely agree with Dave, actually, in that it is a tool in the toolbox. And I did quite a bit of research on this a couple of years ago, and I was looking for proof of the effectiveness of enforcement for littering, and we found none. And the problem with it is that it's a right place, right sort of time kind of operation, and it's very resource intensive. It's very politically popular, though, which does cause some problems. So you can't possibly have enough environmental enforcement officers to get all of the litterers. We do see some local authorities where they have private contractors, where they have hundreds of fixed penalty notices given out, but those numbers are increasing, which says to me that it's not even working as a deterrent, let alone anything else. And I looked at Singapore. I did some research into the figures in Singapore, where it's renowned for being, the cleaner city, and that's usually put down to this $1,000 fine. Is it dollars they have in Singapore? I'm not sure. Very, very hefty littering fines. And what I actually saw was that the figures that they have for cleansing the city is eye-watering. It would make any local authority in Wales literally cry. A significant amount of money is spent on cleansing. And despite the fact that they're not putting more money into enforcement, their fixed penalty notices or equivalent of criminal notices, are actually going up. And even their officials are starting to say this is not enough of a deterrent, and they've actually seen an increase in recalcitrant repeat offenders, which says to me that the enforcement angle is not it's not effective in the way that we hope that it is. And I can see how a lot of people think that it's a quick fix. It's like if we just, threaten them with enforcement, then it won't happen. But that's not the case. That's not how human behavior and human kind of minds work. So I do think that there's a role for it, like as Dave said, and I think particularly around the fly tipping issue, which is slightly different, it's driven by different motivations and different behaviours. There is a role for enforcement, but it is not the answer to tackling littering by itself. And there's very little evidence, considering how resource intensive it is to deliver on a scale that would actually need to be as a visible deterrent.
It's an interesting one. I think those arguments will continue as long as we have this issue on our streets. But I've bemoaned the local environment in my area, but I still volunteer regularly. I clean the park in my street and the street around it. And it's something strange I enjoy walking. My children are grown up doing it with me. And I think that's one of the aspects of what we see now, isn't it? These initiatives bring communities together in a collective effort to improve their areas. They foster that sense of unity and responsibility among residents. Dave, do you find that with the groups you volunteer with? Is it wider than just litter picking? It means more to the people who partake.
I think absolutely. I think people tend to volunteer because they do want to make a difference, but quite often as well is the need. I mean, it's much easier to do a litter pick when you're with a few people than when you're on your own. There is always a bit of companionship, and someone to chat to is so much better than doing it in isolation. But I think this is where volunteering is so important, that it's actually a means for so many people it's their social engagement. It gets them out of the house, they're meeting like-minded people that will be on the same wavelength as them. It can lead to other things as well. So you may start doing, I think Gemma mentioned, with litter picking, it's like a gateway into doing other things. So you start seeing opportunities perhaps in your local park to join a friends group and doing habitat management, or it may be actually get involved in just something completely different, volunteering at the local library or whatever. And this is where people like the Cardiff Third Sector Council can really help by actually showing what is available as well. So once you do start, I think it's great. I think for me personally, I've met so many people that are now genuine friends, which I would never have done if I hadn't started volunteering with Keep Wales Tidy, to be honest.
Gemma, the volunteering aspect must be a big part of what Keep Wales Tidy are about now.
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. And I think Dave is right. What we see reflected in Dave's experience, we see all over Wales, that because it's so easy, you quite often see people going out with their children or with their dogs. It is a stepping stone into greater awareness. And if littering is what kind of drives you to recreate that connection with nature and your local environment and your local community, then that's absolutely brilliant. And that's what we're all about, really. You start off with a litter picker, and you end up, I don't know, managing an allotment or a library or whatever it is. But yeah, we see that across all of our groups, and particularly around nature volunteering and volunteering outside. Loads of the local places for nature program that we've been delivering has been really, really successful. So we've been giving packages to groups schools that kind of help to deliver that little bit of biodiversity. Could be food growing, it could be butterfly gardens, that sort of thing. But it really is that kind of entry level to recreate that connectedness, which I think a lot of us have lost.
Yeah, I think it does definitely lead into wider projects for the communities and further afield in terms of volunteering. I think it's an area in the pod we might have to explore a little bit more. We're coming to the end of the evening's chat, but in the week there was a bit of a viral social media post around litter on a West Wales beach, and I mentioned to people that we were doing this pod and that if they had any questions, let us know. And a couple of friends of the pod have written in and asked a couple of things. So Councillor Stephanie Grimshaw asks, how can we stop fly tipping when fines aren't working? Jem, you mentioned about that plan, which might be in the offing. What are we looking at there?
Yeah, so we've done a really big piece of research based on the behavioural drivers of fly tipping. So we looked specifically at domestic fly tipping, so fly tipping which is coming from households, and this is where we are encouraging local authorities to think about the journey of a resident and how they dispose of their waste. So one of the things that we find, which was really, really simple for local authorities to do, is we did a bit of an audit on local authority websites. And so we pretended we were a resident in that authority, and we said, okay, we've got cupboard or something quite big to get rid of. And it's really, really difficult to find information as to where to go if you don't have the funds for the council to come and collect it. Or if you can't get to your local recycling centre. The other thing we found is that there's a lot of myths and rules, and sometimes quite unnecessary rules around recycling centre use. So we encourage local authorities to kind of look at it from a behavioural perspective. And also look at those joined up policies around waste and cleansing. So there are some local authorities, for example, that are very proud of cleaning up fly tipping within 24 hours, which is great. But if I'm a resident and I've got the choice between paying £75 to get rid of something or putting it outside on my street where it'll get picked up for free in 24 hours, then it becomes, I think there's conflict between those policies. So as part of the litter and fly tipping prevention plans, we're trying to work with them to kind of understand what they are putting out there and what they're promoting, and that's very much tied into promoting things like Repair Cafe and Benthig Library of Things, promoting reuse, shops at waste centres, and essentially fundamentally making it easy to do the right thing, to do what you want people to do with those waste and material items. We find that a lot of policies, and this is unintended consequences of policies. We find that they tend to be conflicting quite a lot of the time. There's different messages going to households around what they do with their waste and where to take it, whether they'll be fined, whether whether they can access the recycling centre, whether they can't. We can work closely with local authorities in understanding what some of those barriers are to doing the right thing, and that is fundamentally what needs to happen.
That's good to hear, actually, because fly tipping is an unbelievable problem, and I won't mention where these sites are, but I've been to several in South Wales, which are just absolutely unbelievable if you go there when they haven't been cleaned up. And it is an area which we really do need to work to address. And it's not just because of the litter, it's the pollution aspect of it. But you mentioned something there about designing out littering behaviours, and that was a question from another friend of the pod, Louis Mertens, and he'd be interested to know what can be done to design out those littering behaviours. Do you want to mention anything around that, Jem?
I think there's a few things around that. I think the circular economy transition and everything that means across all of the sectors is really, really important. And I think it's sort of the forgotten narrative when we talk about climate change. If global transport emissions are equate to about 55% of emissions worldwide, waste and designing out waste in a few key sectors, that's the other 45% and then some. And I think, because I think Dave said earlier, it's not sexy to talk about, it's not a sexy thing. But actually, if we concentrated on actually designing those out at source, then we would be a lot further down the road in terms of tackling emissions and getting to net zero. I think, unfortunately, we have to mandate it. It has to be mandated in the industry. We've had a very long time now where businesses, producers, etc., could have done this. And don't get me wrong, there are some brilliant voluntary initiatives from retailers and the industry, but it's not enough. And so I think it needs to be mandated. On a smaller level, there are quite a lot of nudges and things like around the infrastructure that we have on a local level that will help to design out littering on a street level. So where you place bins, what sort of bins you've got, what colour they are, footprints to bins, which I think was your research topic many years ago, Kerry. There's a lot of things that you can do with the local design of how you design a street. And my background is in regeneration, so I love talking about this. So locally, there are a lot of things that you can do to design it out. But from a prevention and industry perspective, it needs to be mandated. We need to get extended producer responsibility on the packaging elements. We need to reduce consumption individually and at a market level. And we also need to then introduce a secondary producer responsibility, looking at the actual kind of items. So wet wipes being a really good example of that.
No, I'm glad you mentioned my behaviour change work there, Jem. That was a good project. That was. Dave, I've got one more question, but did you want to mention anything around fly tipping or littering behaviours before I've asked my final question?
I agree again with Gemma's comments, and it's looking, I think, for individuals. It's got to be made as easy as possible for them to actually dispose of larger items. And it's trying to join up policies. So if we take Cardiff, for instance, they have a real drive for Cardiff to be, you can live in Cardiff without the need for a car. And that they're very keen on promoting that. So everything is within walking distance or bus distance or cycling. But then you need to have a car to go to the household waste recycling centre, because they're both basically on the edges of the city, and they only allow cars in. You can't walk there, you can't cycle there. So, as Gemma said, if you're on low income, how do you dispose of a large double mattress or a wardrobe that's broken, or a broken fridge freezer? If you were to pay someone to take a fridge freezer away, they would have to actually then take it to the commercial tip and pay the commercial rate, which would be £90. So that's before they charge their rate on top of it. So you'd probably be looking, a minimum of £150 to £200 to get rid of a fridge freezer if you don't go through a council route. So not surprisingly, if someone offers, well, I'll take that for 10 or £20, people are basically just going to do it. So it's got to be made a lot easier, a lot cheaper, a lot quicker, I think, to actually pick up domestic waste from people, if we're going to encourage the behaviour change in terms of transport for them. So it's got to be joined up. Having said, those that actually do fly tip should be heavily penalised. because they're definitely, more than likely, that won't have been their first time. So, and again, repeat offenders, I'd be quite harsh on it. I would crush the van without a second's thought, get them out of business.
It does sound like there's a various aspects of policy which could be better joined up and working together in that particular area. But my last question to you both now, and you might just have given me some of what you were thinking, but Wales has got a new cabinet. The environment area, I think, has got a new minister. I haven't checked portfolio roles, but I'm thinking local environment is going to come under Hugh Iranka-Davis's portfolio. Tell me if I'm wrong, Jem. But if you had the ear of the new minister, what would you ask him to do to help volunteers in this area, Dave?
I think recognition of the contribution that volunteers actually make to Wales, not just in terms of litter picking and the environmental side, but across the whole piece, everywhere. For local councils then to actually recognise that as well and engage with them as well. For example, the budgetary consultation that went out from Cardiff, there was quite a lot of stuff on there on waste and on parks and that side of things. As far as I'm aware, none of that was discussed with volunteer groups, in advance of that. What would be the consequences? What ideas could we bring to the table to help in terms of these budgetary costs cuts? Are there things that we could actually help with and ideas? So I think much more engagement, much more recognition of the expertise that a lot of these groups and charities bring, and just years of experience, and just to use that and recognise it.
Thanks, Dave. And Jem, I'm sure as an organisation, Keep Wales Tidy will be engaging with Hugh Iranka-Davis quite soon, if not already. But what would you ask, either with your Keep Wales Tidy hat on or as a personal request? What would you ask for that would help volunteers in this area?
I think firstly, I'm really pleased with Hugh's appointment, because he's been really proactive in this area. I think he's going to be a really good advocate, so yeah, we're really hopeful. If he's listening, I think having a Wales-wide litter and fly tipping prevention plan that recognises that contribution that volunteers make, but also the contribution of businesses, the extent of what local authorities can and can't do, the contribution of schools and what they can bring to this area, and indeed, all of the other kind of actors who are working in this area. And I mentioned some of the, like, Repair Cafe and Benthig and some of those other ENGOs. Having a Wales prevention plan would give us all a framework in Wales upon which to hook all of our work on, and we can use that to monitor our progress, and we can demonstrate through the data that volunteer groups collect, and we can show then that we are actually making progress, we are actually doing things about this. At the moment, without that plan and without that consistent monitoring requirement, it's very difficult to kind of have that conversation and say, oh, we're going in this direction or we're going in that direction. I'd also hope that if that was built into a Wales-wide framework, we'd also be able to say, look, when deposit return schemes and extended producer responsibility comes in, we would also be able to say to everyone in Wales, look, this is the impact that we're having. Look, this is what producers are doing. That would be a much needed kind of positive and more consistent narrative than we have at the moment.
Well, I hope one or both of you and your organisations invites you out on a pick or a clean up somewhere. And I think the bottom of his constituency is the Ogmore River. And I know, Dave, you've been part of groups that have absolutely taken tons and tons of things out of Ogmore, and I suspect there's more to do. So Hugh could perhaps join you for that. Look, I want to thank you both for joining us tonight. This subject is close to my heart. I've been involved in it personally and professionally for probably 15, 16 years now. But if listeners want to hear more about your work or what you have to say, can they find you on social media at all, Dave?
Yes, both myself and Cardiff Rivers Group are on Facebook and X, which is easily to find on there. And also we have a website, which is simply cardiffriversgroup.org.uk. There's a general inquiry form on there for any questions. There's also a calendar of events. So it's an open invitation to anybody that wants to come and join us, just come along and get in touch. Yeah, happy to answer any questions.
And Gemma, yourself?
So you can find out more about Keep Wells Tidy on our website. So if you just Google Keep Wells Tidy, on there you can find contact details for community officers in every local authority. So whatever area you're in Wales, you can contact them and find out about volunteering in your area. We're also on X, as it is now. So at Keep Wells Tidy. There's also at KWT_policy. If you've got any policy questions, you can always fire them to that address, and me and my team will pick them up.
Thank you both once again. If you've enjoyed today's episode, then you can find more from Hiraeth on the various podcast apps. We are on all the socials at Hiraeth Pod. And if you want to support us with your wallet as well as your ears, you can do so from just £3 a month at patreon.com/HiraethPod.
Thank you for listening to Hiraeth. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.